name of our show.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Large Glass. I'm Todd.
I'm Terri.
Good to see all of you tonight. I'm just making sure our sound is working. I think it is working, which is good. Mm-hmm. How's everybody doing tonight? We are happy to be back for episode
31.
31.
Yes.
31. All right. Good.
Good.
A lot going on. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. A lot of good stuff in news. Mm-hmm. A super interesting artist to talk about tonight, which I'm excited about. Mm-hmm. And let us know you're out there. Say hi in the chat. Give us a shout and tell us how you're doing. Do you want a drink?
I do.
I think we should open our drinks.
I think you might be right.
All right, good. So tonight's artist is from
Georgia.
And we've had this beer before because we did another artist from Georgia.
We did.
And that was, hold on, who was it?
Who was it? It was
it was somebody.
Somebody
was from Georgia.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I have to think about it again.
We're doing Terrapin Brewing Company again, and unfortunately, because the green screen, this can is not going to show up well. But I am having the Wake and Bake, and this is a coffee oatmeal imperial stout. Terry is having
the sour cherry,
the Dancing Gummy Bear, which is a hemp cherry Berliner Weisse, which is, you can smell this. We were smelling this. I remember the video.
Yep, I do too. I don't know why I can't place it. And as soon as we can, we're going to be like, oh, yeah.
Well, there's David Backus. Josh and I are here together watching. Hey, guys.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Good to have you. Oh, this looks good. I forgot how much I liked this.
That does look good.
I think this is going to be perfect. So beer from Georgia, artist from Georgia. Is anyone out there from Georgia?
Like, it wasn't Jim.
It definitely wasn't Jim. It was, all right, give me a second to think about this. Hold on, let me channel let me get deep inside the brain here. It was not Kilgallen.
Was it Betty Saar? No.
I don't think it was Betty Saar.
No, I don't. Was it Kilgallen? No, she's from Maryland, right? She was from D.C. and all those areas. Ugh. And then she went to Oregon. Oh, goodness. I can't believe this is good,
This is age.
This is good because it means we've done so many that we can't remember.
I like that better than age.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
That's much better.
Right?
Our brains are filled with
stuff.
Too much stuff. I should pour you, even though you... Terry has been pre-gaming as she always does, so she's a little ahead of me.
Yes, which is good because I make a lot of faces when I first sip it.
That's right. But it's good.
It is good.
That's for you.
Thank you.
So here's to episode 31. Here's to all of our followers, subscribers, supporters that keep coming back. We really appreciate that. So cheers to all of you.
Cheers.
Cheers. Ooh, yeah. Oh, you're making that face? Now, this is so good.
This is so sour.
This is like a piece of cake.
This is like a lemon. But it's good.
All right.
It actually smells like hemp.
It does. The hemp is so powerful.
Yeah.
You can it's just rising up here with us. Let's see. We got text Mike. Hi, Josh and David. Ben, sorry he's late. Ben, don't worry. We didn't realize that you were late. And that's it so far in the chat. Good.
Yeah.
Good. All right. People are here.
Yeah.
Which I love. Okay. So where should we start tonight? We do some news like we always do?
Yeah, we could do some news.
I've got some strange stuff on the news for us tonight. So let's pop over and let's take a look at what's going on in news. Let's see if I can get the right slide up first. And I did. See that?
This seems appropriate for Easter time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does.
But
Although,
anyway, go ahead.
I'm going to go to a place you totally don't expect with this.
That's cool.
So, so what we're looking at here is the Leonardo da Vinci's Salvator Mundi painting, which is known for a number of things. Number one, it's a beautiful painting, right? But it also recently sold at auction for one of the largest sum This is the most expensive painting in the world.
Ah.
Okay, but before we get to that number, and not that we should always dwell on that number, this story has to do with that. So there's a man named Ben Lewis, and Ben Lewis actually wrote a book called The Last Leonardo. And The Last Leonardo goes through the whole story of this particular painting, right? And it travels from this very studio. And whether or not, he questions whether or not this is an authentic Leonardo, or, well, whether or not it is a signature Leonardo, meaning Leonardo himself painted the entire thing. He postulates in this that many of his studio assistants painted it, and he might have contributed a small amount, which definitely makes it a valuable painting, but it has been authenticated as an actual signature Leonardo. Now, the story gets better, okay? And I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but in this, he goes back in time to 1958 when a family with the last name of Handry, and forgive me for missing the gentleman's first name on Handry. I'm having trouble recalling that. But in 1958, the Handrys were in Europe, and they went to Europe a fair bit. They were from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and the Handrys used to collect art, right? They went to an estate auction, and they bought this painting for 45 pounds.
Oh.
45 pounds they paid for this. Brought it home, had it in their attic, had it in their house. It was a lovely addition to, their home. Now, in 2005, the Handrys sold this to a local auction house for $1,175 and paid auctioneer fees of $700. Do the math on that. They walked home with a whopping $475 for this painting.
Goodness.
Not long after that, it was auctioned, and I'm talking about just a few years later. Inside of a few years, it was in 2011, it was authenticated as an actual Leonardo. And then it was not long before the mega auction houses got their claws on it, and it sold for, at the first time it actually sold for $100 million. Then it resold for $127 million, and then it sold for $450 million.
Oh my goodness.
So now it belongs to a prince in Abu Dhabi. And why am I telling you all of this? Well, I wouldn't be telling you all of this if it didn't somehow weirdly connect. What do we got for next slide? If it didn't weirdly connect to the world of the NFT. So Ben Wilson himself was so frustrated and irritated by the fact that the Handry family lost out on that money and never got a penny of that money. Okay, so imagine walking away with your check for $700 to instantly see the painting you once hung in your house with your family, traded on the open market over a course of years, turn into a sum of money that she's a librarian and he owned a sheet metal shop.
Yeah.
Turn into a sum of money that would never be captured by every generation of your family to come for as long as they lived. Ben Wilson was really frustrated by this, that they never captured that. So what he's doing is he made a copy of the painting, but in this case, Jesus has a fistful of dollars, and he made an NFT out of it. And the NFT just went up for auction on the OpenSea market. And Ben Wilson says, quote, "My target price is $450 million in Ethereum. If it doesn't sell, I want to at least draw attention to the crazy excesses and injustices of the art market where families who are unaware of the complexities of the art market sell heirlooms for small change and receive no resale fees when the work turns out to be a sleeper, the art market term for an undiscovered and undervalued old master painting." Now, that's a quote from him. Now, the interesting thing about an NFT, and we're not even going to go into that again because I already did that, but in an NFT, when you create it, you can encode the NFT to give you, the originator of that NFT, a portion of any resale in perpetuity back to you. So if this painting sells 10 more times in the future, then if 10% is designated to Ben Wilson, he will actually receive that sum of money. It's actually really a pretty fantastic. I just said Ben Wilson. It's Ben Lewis. I keep saying Ben Wilson. I don't know why.
Okay.
Ben Lewis. Anyway, it's up, OpenSea. Take a look and watch what happens to this. It'll be really interesting. Also, much of the proceeds from the sale of this NFT will be going to that family.
Oh, that's
so
really
that's another
nice.
reason why he's trying to turn this so that he can get some justice for that family. So that's tonight's art news story. But I have one more. One more. And that is, of course, the 100 in Art Tour. And I've received some news from the 100 in Art Tour about what our role will be that night.
Okay.
I'm going to keep saying that. So the Hunterdon Art Tour will be doing their annual Artist Open Studio Tour in Hunterdon County, New Jersey on May 1st and May 2nd. That's a Saturday and a Sunday. Typically, the reception for that takes place the Friday night before at the Hunterdon Art Museum, which is a beautiful stone building on the South Branch of the Raritan River in Clinton, New Jersey. And that reception typically has the works of every single person on the tour hanging in the museum. Hundreds of people come. It's a huge event, but obviously we cannot do that this year. So, Terri and I will be hosting this event all weekend long, but specifically on Friday night, we are going to be inside the museum itself, almost alone. There might be 4 or 5 other bodies with us there, and we will be set up broadcasting from the museum the opening reception. Now, in an attached Zoom meeting to that reception, we will have as many of the 60 artists that are going to be participating in this open studio tour present in a Zoom meeting. So we will introduce all of them. We will introduce the organizers of the Hunterdon Art Tour. We will introduce the director of the Hunterdon Art Museum. Hopefully, I believe she's available, but don't quote me. This is going to take place on Friday night, April 30th, from 7 to 9 p.m. So we will be at the Hunterdon Art Museum live. I hope you will join us. I think it's going to be a really big night for us. I think we're going to have a lot of people, checking that out. So I'm excited. Terri does not like it when I tell her what the numbers are.
Nope.
She doesn't like it.
No,
Not
that's
one
okay
bit.
though.
I can't blame you.
Yeah.
Oh, Christina and Angus Ron are here.
There's a lot of people here. Scultore is here. Good
Hey,
to see you with you
Scultore.
both. Amanda Toolin just ran out of work to join the show. Hello there.
Some of you on that chat will notice that you now have a nice little white diamond encased in a pretty magenta color.
Ooh.
You have been designated VIPs. Okay, now, if you don't have a pretty diamond, don't be upset that I didn't make you a VIP. I can't give you VIP and moderator. So if you have the sword, Amanda Toolin, then you can, of course, take people out with your sword. But if you're not a moderator, I might have made you a VIP. So check next to your name to see which one of those you are. And don't worry, I've got VIP status to give out. Ben, you are definitely getting VIP status. So stay tuned for that. All right. Enough about the news.
Mike Rader's here.
Mike Rader's here. Good to see you, Mike. Woo. Thank you for that. Thanks for the congratulations. It's good to see you as always. Should we move on?
Let's move on.
All right. Oh, now how did I get back to the main screen? That was not my intention at all. Let's see what we got here. Notable birthdays.
Notable birthdays.
I got to tell you, this guy looks exactly like a guy I work with.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Wow.
And when I saw this picture, I haven't spoken. So first of all, this guy that I work with is on sabbatical. He's on break. And I was like, I have to reach out to him. I'm not going to say his name online. But I sent him this picture. And I was like, this is you. And it is.
Yes,
if you saw a picture of him.
Reincarnated.
Oh, my God. All right. So let's see. We got some birthdays to do. So.
Yes, we do. So this one is, his birthday is today. It's Waterhouse, John William Waterhouse.
Yep.
He was born in 1849, one of the pre-Raphaelites, known for his very, I love his work. My 13-year-old self loves his work. So, he usually blends ancient Greek mythology, some romance in there, very Shakespearean, poetic portraits.
Scultore says nice pocket square.
It is. It looks like a heart, actually.
It does look like a heart.
I was like, look at that.
I was going to do a little PSA and say, if you or a loved one has been found to be exposed to pre-Raphaelite art, you can reach out and get help. It is possible.
I like pre-Raphaelite.
I do
art.
too. I do too.
It's very thing.
But you have to. It's a hard thing to admit.
It is a hard thing to admit.
Inside of certain academic circles, one does not walk around screaming, "I love the pre-Raphaelites," but I like the pre-Raphaelites.
I loved his Ophelia painting. Growing up, that was something I had in my room.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Ben says, "I know this one."
Mm-hmm.
So
this is a good one.
All right.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday to John William Waterhouse. Moving on. This guy.
I love his name.
His name suits him 100%.
This is Odd Nerdrum. And his birthday, he was born in, oh my gosh, I don't have the year, but his birthday is on the 8th of April. He's a Norwegian figure painter.
Scultori says it's the best. He's talking about Pre-Raphaelites too. So he's in alignment with us. I like that.
Yeah.
Odd Nerdrum doesn't look happy in this photo. And even though it is his birthday, I chose this photo to sort of harken back to that moment when he's a Norwegian. He got caught for tax fraud. He had is
this from his trial?
Yeah, this is from his trial when he was being sentenced to a year in prison, which he did not succeed in his appeals. And so, unfortunately, he wasn't even allowed to paint in prison because painting was seen as a commercial endeavor, and that was deemed not legal, so he wasn't allowed to paint in prison. Okay. But Odd Nerdrum, nonetheless, has come out and painted a lot about his ordeal with the courts.
Okay.
So, and I got one more painting here.
Wow.
Look up his work. It's very strange. A lot of people sort of compare him to people like Rembrandt. I think it's a stretch, but it's
well, maybe his lighting.
He also has a glazing technique that he uses that really kind of looks like that. So look closely at his paintings if you're interested in that. Happy birthday, Odd. Moving on, we have this lovely gentleman. And this guy is a favorite of mine. So Charles Birchfield makes some of the most fantastic paintings. Charles's birthday is on the 9th, so it's coming up in 3 days. And his landscapes to me are some of the most fantastical, awesomely creative, beautiful images. He does not try to emulate anyone else, I feel like. It's a really interesting technique and approach to painting. And I love this work. I mean, look at this.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
I'm not familiar with him at all.
Oh, his work is fantastic. I think I don't have one more. We're back to Waterhouse. Okay, so that's going to do it for birthdays for us. So let's get out of that window. Oh, Christina McKinnon, thanks for the sub. That's awesome. Terry, what are you drinking? Pumpkin Audrey wants to know.
I am drinking the Terrapin Dancing Gummy Bear.
This is a terrible, terrible name.
Hemp Cherry Berliner Weiss.
It smells amazing.
It's good. It does smell amazing. You can really smell the hemp in there.
I wish we were actually able to get the smell out to our viewers somehow.
The color is really pretty too. It's like this blushing beer. It's got a really pretty color to it.
I think it looks fantastic.
You can see that. Very sour.
Yeah.
On the palate there.
Yeah.
Yeah. A little wincing. That's why I don't do it online right away. I have to pregame just to get all of that out.
We once made the mistake of brushing our teeth before a show and then having, a glass of wine, which is probably the single worst offense to the wine you could possibly make. So, rather than offend the wine, we'll offend each other with our unbrushed teeth.
Yeah.
All right, let's just go back and mention a little bit about support. So if we get to 25 subscribers, and thank you, Christina, for bringing us a little bit closer to that, which is awesome. We're going to be giving away a copy of The Secret Lives of Color, which is a favorite book of ours.
Yes.
I think we should change this up a little bit.
Yeah.
We've been harping on this book for a while.
We should read a passage next week just so you can see how awesome it is.
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
It might inspire people to sub.
We'll give you a choice of a color and we'll read to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mike Rader says large glass smell-o-vision. Yes, exactly.
I thought cranberry and something.
Ben was commenting on the reflections on the water in the Birchfield paintings, which were actually really quite beautiful. I'm sorry I missed that, Ben. So, all right, let's move on from here. Let's get down to business, shall we? Should we look at who we're working with tonight?
Yes, let's take a look.
All right, so tonight we have Amy Sherald.
Amy Sherald.
I am excited to present.
I am really excited to present
Sherald.
her.
Yeah.
This is kind of building on what we discussed last week. That's something that we put in the newsletter. We did some old school portraits, and we looked at Goya and Van Gogh, mostly because it was their birthdays, and I was like, let's take a look at that. And then we decided to look at their portraits because sometimes not the most attention is given to the portraits. And then we kind of veered into a more contemporary upcoming. I mean, she's very famous right now, Amy Sherald, in her portraiture. There's a lot going on in her portraits too.
Yeah, and there's a portrait that she did that all of you know. We're not going to put that out there first. We're actually going to put that further down in.
And actually, that portrait's just, I know it's like one of the most famous pieces that she did, but that's not all she's about. And I think that's one of the reasons.
She doesn't even put it on her website.
No, she doesn't, because that's just it's the only one of the only commission pieces she did that's gained the most notoriety. But what she's really about is depicting everyday people.
Everyday people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I love about it. And so when she goes beyond the everyday,
yeah,
she just kind of like says, yeah, that was a big deal, but we're just going to put that away and let's keep focusing on what it is I do.
Yeah.
Which I love. So let's pop through a couple. So here she is. I love her glasses. I want to like.
I do. I love her sweater too.
Yeah. So she's got a good presence. But let's start looking at some of the work. You want to start talking about her?
I could start talking about her. I wanted to pull up my thing because I had some of the titles behind her stuff too. But she's American. She was born in 1973. She was born in Columbus, Georgia, but grew up a little bit too, and she lived in Baltimore for a while, so she's kind of been all up and down the eastern seacoast. I think she lives in New Jersey right now.
Oh, no kidding.
A couple years. I found something about that, and I'll go into that in a little bit. But her focus is portraiture. In 1997, BFA from Clark Atlanta University in Atlanta, Georgia. And then in 2004, her MFA from the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore.
Which Memory Vessel is saying Micah alum, which is where Memory Vessel also went to school.
I remember.
Yes. So Micah alum.
Yeah. She's collected all over the place: the National Museum of Women in the Arts in D.C., the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Embassy of the United States in Dakar, Senegal, Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art, all over the place, National Museum. She's won numerous awards, including the Pollock Krasner Foundation grant, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptures grant, lots of solo and group exhibitions all over the United States. She's actually featured right now, if anyone's on the West Coast in LA, the Great American Facts show with that's at Hauser Wirth in LA, and that's up till June.
Yeah, that looks like a really good show.
That does
actually
look like a really good show. But we're seeing some of her images here. She's got really fantastic names for them. Do you want to go talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit. I mean, I'm really taken by her, in these earlier works, and by earlier, they're not that early. Like, I think we should keep in mind that most of this work takes place in a span of, how many years are we talking about here? 5? 6?
Yeah, about.
Yeah, it's not that she hasn't been painting for long. She has been, but a lot of what we're looking at, and if I refer to old works or earlier works, we're not talking about anything that's extraordinarily early.
Well, I think she hit some milestones in the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And I think most of these paintings were done within the past, like 2007, 2008.
So it's a little longer than I had anticipated. Yeah.
Right.
But what I'm taken by is I love the stark ground. Right. So in these earlier pieces, the figure-ground relationship to me is one that is challenging. Right. It's sort of like if you look at this gentleman's his jacket, right, or that shirt that he's wearing on top of everything, the wrinkles in the folds suggest the presence of light, of course, right? I mean, there's dimensionality there. But then all of a sudden, there's no hint of shadow from him on the wall. He floats in this space that is just, one that makes me wonder, where is he and how is he held in place in a strange sort of way? That's a very formalist comment, but I feel like that's something that bears kind of a remark here.
So what she likes to focus on is everyday people, which is what we were talking about. And she does focus on African Americans who are underrepresented in arts in America. So her approach was to actually photograph people on the street that she was interested in, or someone she saw in the supermarket, or someone she saw in the bookstore, and she would approach them and ask to take their picture or get some of their information so that she can see them in the future to take their picture in more posed situations.
Right.
And then she would go ahead and do her paintings. It's interesting because you have this one up, and this gentleman was actually in a couple of her other paintings, but she just put different clothing on him. So I just remembered her talking about that.
Okay.
she was saying that sometimes she would take the picture and then she'd start painting the person, and then whatever she was looking for in that person didn't have it, and she wouldn't force it. Like, she feels like they have to have something for her to keep going with the painting.
Yeah. I love this idea of being connected to people. So first of all, utilizing people as your subject, right? Number one is one thing. But then being connected to them in the physical world in such a way that you can walk around or drive around, and all of a sudden and she said this, she's like, and I would know. I would see someone walking and I would know.
Yes.
And she'd get out of the car or walk up to them and say.
And she said she'd have an incredibly awkward conversation.
as I would expect it would be, right? I mean, now I of course wonder about, like, I put myself in those shoes, and I'm like, if I walked up to someone on the street and said, hi, I want to use you in my art, I don't know what kind of reception I would get there. I think there's probably different responses for different people. And I have a funny feeling that even though all of the conversations are awkward, I'd be curious to see, like, where those lines are drawn, right? And what some of the conversations she's had with people before. So, these keep going, and we look at a bunch of these, and what I like about them is, number one, they look right at me. By the way, I missed Moped Vagrant's comment where he's like, and someone else too. Another Micah alum. Yes. So sorry about that, Moped Vagrant. Yes. Lots of Micah alums in the audience.
Yes.
I like the way these subjects in these paintings sort of just are. They just are. To me, they don't feel like they are trying to say something to me. No. They don't feel like they are necessarily trying to. There's a very subtle, direct interaction that I can ask my, I guess what I'm saying is like, for example, this young woman here in the varsity jacket who is, looking at the viewer, right? She's not smiling. She's not frowning. It's very hard to get a read off of her face, but there's this moment of authenticity. I feel like there's a moment of, Boo Jazz is now following. Thank you for the follow, Boo Jazz. That's awesome. We love to have you. I feel like in that moment of authenticity, I get to both try and understand her and have her make me try to understand me.
Oh, yes.
I mean, and maybe that's a stretch, but I feel like there's a moment we have together, like when you glance at someone at a party and, you have that across the room kind of look at a person. You're too far away to speak to them, but the eyes do something with that person, right? So anyway, I'm hogging the show here.
No, there's definitely a presence with these portraits. The other thing is they're at least life size. She paints on like 10 by 10 canvases. So they really have a presence in the space that are not to be ignored. I love the juxtaposition of the flat colors with the detail in the clothing, and then with the flesh tones too.
Which we're gonna talk about, those flesh tones, because if you look carefully at the tonality of the skin in these paintings, it is a grayscale. It is a value scale.
Yes.
Which is something I'm actually really interested in these.
Yeah.
So do you want to start off on talking about that? We actually have a video to show you in a little while, actually, where she does talk about this a little bit.
I actually also wanted to hit on some of the titles. So the last image that we saw, she's got really interesting titles. This one's called A Clear Unspoken Granted Magic. And she was talking about when she names them, her sister would help her with some of the names. And sometimes they would just come to her. The next one that we're looking at, I just want to pull that one up. She was learning to love moments for themselves. So there's a poetry in the titles that she's giving them as well.
Yeah. And you want to know, there's another aspect to this in terms of I'm going to make another formal comment about these. But the patterns in the clothes and the treatment of the clothes is very sort of fashion-esque, right? So in this one beforehand, we see this houndstooth print, this floral print on the scarf.
Gorgeous.
There's a flatness to that, and there's an exactitude to that. There's a geometry to that is sharp,
Yep.
right? However, of course, when we get to the modeling of the skin, we get to the softer tones of the face, the softer handling of the face. That juxtaposition between that hard edge geometry, and not always a hard edge geometry, but to some degree, even in this one, and the softness of that skin, I think it really sets the individual and the fashion apart on some level and allows us to focus on that person,
I think
which I love. I think that's really a beautiful way to sort of put emphasis on the face and emphasis on the figure.
Yeah.
Right? But for what it's worth, I'm rambling.
No, not at all.
So we were going to talk about the treatment of the skin tones, which I think is really quite interesting.
Talk about the treatment of the skin tones.
Maybe we should get into a little influence first.
We can get into a little bit of influence too. So she had some key influences. So she grew up in the South. And whenever you see an interview with her or a talk with her, she begins to say what it was like growing up, and how her mother sat down with her in kindergarten and said, look, this is the way it is. You're a black child. And she went to school and mostly like with a lot of white kids. So they had that conversation. She remembers going to a museum, and one thing she said that, her parents weren't really into art. In fact, they actually didn't really encourage her to be an artist. They wanted her to go into medicine. Her father was a doctor, like a dentist. So
a lot of parents do
she
that.
didn't have a lot of exposure, but she remembers going on a trip to a museum, and she saw this painting here, and this is by Bo Bartlett. The painting is called Object Permanence, and it's the first painting she saw with an African American in it. And she loved the painting. It really affected her. It affected her on multiple levels because, like I said, it was the first painting that she saw where there was a black man represented. Later, she finds out in her life that Bo Bartlett is white, and he portrayed him he stepped into the painting as a black man, and she was amazed at the empathy to be able to put yourself in that position and to see from another side. And it affected her on all these different levels.
Yeah.
Some of her other influences included this portrait, which is pretty well known. This is a portrait of Frederick Douglass, and it's in history books. She came across this, she came across it in her youth, but she was looking at it again after she started her portrait series.
Yeah.
And she was able to identify that the gray tones with the skin leave the color out.
They do.
Yes.
And there's some things, I don't want to interrupt you, so if you want to keep going on that.
Ahead.
But I also noticed that there were occasions when I was looking up specific influences either on her or other artists, and I would find photographs that were incredibly old, right? That might have portrayed an African-American artist. But the skin tones, I thought to myself at first, I was like, wait, that's not an African-American artist. But then I actually had to look twice. So there is this there's this interesting play on how skin tone is represented when it comes to black and white, and not just from the standpoint of either African-American painting or photography, but all the way back in terms of grisaille and the way the function of grisaille works inside of, we have one more photo to talk about.
Yes, well, this is kind of going along the same theme. This is W.E.B. Du Bois's, this came from a show that was back in the 1900s. I think she said 1904, although other sources say 1900. A Paris exhibition called The American Negro. And photography had come into play, which this was one of the other parallels I was seeing with our show from last week, because we had, going back, we had Goya, who was dying around the time that photography was invented.
Right.
And then Van Gogh coming in when photography is established, and they both painted portraits differently in relation to that.
To how that was working,
right.
Sure.
So they weren't into this thing. Now we see someone like Amy Sherald coming in and using the photography influences in some ways, but abandoning them in
other
others.
ways. Right.
So with the photography being invented and available to people, and especially in this exhibition, she had noted that it became a way for Black Americans to kind of reclaim their identity,
Right.
And be able to create a narrative that they didn't have a say in before.
Right.
And they were able to portray themselves how they wanted and deserved to be portrayed.
Right.
And this was one of the portraits from that show that she pointed out. And again, we see the gray tones.
Yeah, and we're gonna kind of take two approaches to the gray tones, actually, from both the photography standpoint that we're talking about here, and I forgot this. I keep stumbling over my words.
What?
Because I think we're gonna get to the Grisaille slide, and then I have another influence.
Oh, wait a minute.
Because one of her key influences also in this was Wes Anderson, which is a really interesting connection.
Wes Anderson is, with the style and the way that he uses the whole.
There's a certain starkness and the symmetry,
yes.
particularly in Moonrise Kingdom. And this,
she did point out Moonrise Kingdom as an influence.
Right. So I threw that in there just because I think that's actually, it's a really interesting connection, especially to the way in which she uses color, right? And that central stark figure.
Yes.
Right?
Yep,
So, I mean, I think that reference would be made no matter what, but she cites that as being a key influence.
She does, and actually this specific scene with this specific element, she had said that this was something that's in the back of her mind with some of the portraits.
Right. By the way, Mom said hi. Hi, Mom. I don't want to ignore you out there. I know you've got other things on your mind tonight. But now, if the next slide is not the Grisaille slide, I'm just going to stop and you can take over the show. Okay, so here we are. Okay. We've got the first reference to Grisaille. And Grisaille, spelled Grisaille, is a technique involving the use of the black and white value scale, right, meaning the gray tones, to sort of emphasize the volumes and sort of forms of usually something in the body as an emphasis for, learning or understanding color usage.
Yeah.
Right? And so it often sticks, like when we use gray tones to sort of articulate volumes, it seems to jump off a little bit more obviously.
Yeah. Now, traditionally, so it's a traditional technique as well.
Sure.
So that's one of the things I love about Amy Sherald. She's using this traditional technique. And as you can see here, Grisaille is fantastic for portraying it's two-dimensional, but it gives that sculptural elements, like a three-dimensional rising out of that two-dimensional plane.
Yeah, you can see it here. I mean, those almost look like sculptures, actually, that are standing in front of, but this is in fact a painting. And the juxtaposition of the Grisaille-treated sculptures in the center next to the painted figures, there's much more of a volumetric kind of feel to the sculptures themselves, giving them a dominance in the painting, which is strange to think about over the color usage.
Yes. Yeah. Now, there's a couple of reasons why we see Grisaille used in artwork. Sometimes it can function as a model for an engraver to work from. It gives them like the sketch. Sometimes painters use it as an underpainting to sketch out their designs for painting. And sometimes it's just executed for its own sake, like Amy does in her paintings.
Well, and I'd like to talk about this from the standpoint of a teacher in the arts as well. When we employ the value scale, right, and when we deal with any level of two-dimensional design, color theory, drawing, we look at the value scale for a number of reasons. Value, this range of light and dark between white and black, is important because, well, number one, we need to understand how light and shadow work and how to carefully handle the subtle differences between those things, right? That's the obvious answer. But what we also do a lot of exercises in is the comparison between various value stages, right? Let's say we took a value scale that had 11 degrees, the 0 being black and the 11 being white, or the other way around, depending on how you want to sort of grade your value scale, right? Well, every step, and they have to be even steps from 1 to 11, can reference the hue of a color, right? Or a particular hue or a particular saturation of a color. So we might take a yellow, for example, and compare that to something that might be right around a 2 in the value scale, whereas a burnt umber might be more closely related to a 10. Now, what I find interesting about that and Amy Sherald's use of grisaille, use of gray tones in the actual skin tones of these people, is it gives us a reference to, at least from an art education standpoint, how we learn to understand color. Right? And I love that reference. I mean, I know she talks about how, a black body is inherently political when it is, presented to the public, right? In any way, shape, or form. And she talks about this. And she kind of wants a chance to step out of that for a moment and just allow that person to be human. And that's why she talks about painting everyday people. But on some level, that treatment of skin tones with grisaille is a really beautiful example of how we come to learn to understand color on a fundamental level. And I know it's a very technical way of approaching it, but it does have a connection, which I really quite love. All right, so we got some bathers.
Yes, this is the bathers. I wasn't going to talk. This is one of her pivotal pieces. Why? Because it sold for a ton of money. No, but this is one of my favorite paintings by her. It was painted in, I believe, 2015, and at the Phillips Evening Sale of the 20th Century and Contemporary Art, it sold for $4,265,000.
That's fantastic.
When it was estimated to sell around $150K to $200K, so it really kind of
shattered the expectations.
It really did. It's
and
beautiful.
why wouldn't it? I mean,
Why
okay.
wouldn't it?
I mean, so first of all, we're back to that whole. I love how this painting exemplifies that notion that I was thinking about before, where flatness in the fashion side of it helps to sort of.
But the funny thing is, you're saying flatness in the fashion side of it, and I see more flatness and I remember her saying how much she loved the flatness in some of her images, but the background. Like everything to me seems flat but the swimsuits and the details, but then it's like a push-pull with her paintings, because sometimes it's like, no, the skin is where it's at.
Look at that negative space between the contrapposto arm on the woman in yellow. I mean, it's like, it's really
it's a diamond.
There's a real sort of shimmer between that and the top of the bikini and the shape of the arm. I mean, there's this really gorgeous relationship. Also, look at the negative space between the two figures that drops down between them.
I like the body language too.
Yeah,
because they're holding hands together. There's that retro feel that I really love.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just to make a quick note, Pumpkin Audrey says no clouds or background. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely part of what we're talking about.
Yes, and that's actually a very important thing to notice, because she doesn't have any reference points for quite some time. Her later pieces start incorporating,
and we'll get into those
other elements, but this particular body of work didn't have anything in the background.
And John Park says this might be out there, but I see a Matisse echo in here, and I love that reference. I think that's actually really quite interesting. When you think about the dancers and the spaces between them, and you start looking at that, and that background is similar. Is similar. Yes, it does have a retro look. Yeah, exactly. I had that. Mom says I had that bathing cap, the purple one with the flowers on it. Really, that's awesome. So I think that there's so many angles that we can approach these from, and the Bathers was a breakout piece for her, but this one as a breakout piece for her also.
This is her. To me, this is her breakthrough piece.
I love this painting. I love that cup. I love the look on her face.
Yeah. So looking at this painting in 2016, this painting is titled Miss Everything. And in parentheses, it's called Unsuppressed Deliverance. So she entered a contest, I guess. It's the Outwin Bukiver Prize for the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. There were 2,500 entries, and the prize was $25,000, and she won it. She was the first African-American female to win this prestigious award. It kind of put her on the map for artists for artists in general. So
yeah.
Yep.
We got JE11 Mart has followed. Welcome them. Nice to see you. Thanks for following. Good to have you. And Sculptori says, I wonder if the cutout quality of the shapes and negative space are significant. And I'm going to just pop back to that for a second.
I'm sure everything is significant.
But I like that reference because now, and I'm going to start to think about how, all of a sudden they're removed from that background, right? Their space in the world, and let's call the world they're painting, has this defined edge, or it has this, and I think this is what I was trying to say before when I talk about the figure-ground relationship. There's an awkwardness to the way in which they occupy space, which makes sense, which makes sense just from an identity standpoint. I understand that. I mean, or at least I recognize the presence of that in this piece, right? So back to the teacup. Did you want to talk a little bit about that some more?
That's pretty much it. Now, I know that she had photographed this young woman for this in several different poses. She did admit to having this Alice in Wonderland fascination at the time that she painted this. But that's pretty much...
Yeah, no, and I think the flatness of the fashion in this one really sticks out. And I think that's because the treatment of the background now has a little bit of a modeled effect. The
background does have a modeled effect in this one.
And so all of these formal things that I keep pointing out, which you may or may not find interesting, but I feel like they all play upon the presence of the actual person in this. And she keeps talking about the ordinary person, right? And I think through all these different treatments of space, or clothing is an element of identity, right? I think all of those things have a way in which they alter the perception of the person in the piece.
We've got some comments.
Yeah, we do. Memory Vessel says, yes, she's isolating them into focus, which is I love that comment. I think that's a really brilliant way of putting it. She made use of only 3 colors in this painting. Awesome. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So the range in which she sort of gets to what she's saying with 3 colors. And now we have the one that you all probably know at this point.
We all know this one.
May not have realized that she painted, but Amy Sherald.
Yeah, so Miss Everything, the last painting, did catch the attention. And also, I think because she won at the National Portrait Gallery.
Caught the attention of the Obamas.
Michelle Obama, yep. So in 2018 was the unveiling, but 2017 started the painting. This is First Lady Michelle Obama. That's the actual title of the painting. It's her first commissioned piece, and frankly, I think it's her only one that I'm aware of. And she was a little nervous because that's not something she typically does. She likes to portray everyday people. Right. In portraying her, there was some legwork done. She went through the stylist. She consulted with Michelle Obama's stylist to find the right outfits, and that was Meredith Coop. But they decided on this sleeveless maxi dress by Michelle Smith's 2017 line for the American fashion line called Millie. She chose this dress because it's connected to quilting. So there's a bit of a history with that she wanted to portray. There were a lot of criticisms for this painting. Yeah. People said it doesn't really look like her. I think it does. The gray tones people criticized. Probably because they didn't understand what she was doing. History of painting was. I love this painting and the fluidity, and I feel like there's like multiple paintings in this actually with the dress and everything like that. Right. Well, there's a couple of comments in here, and Pumpkin Audrey says love. Ben Hagenbush is referring to the previous one. That is my favorite one, the one with the actual cup. Sculptori, she made the figure of Michelle into a landscape, a mountain, which is what Mike Rader Potato Head says, like a mountain. Can't help but think of Mount Saint Victoire.
Yeah. And all the while, that mountain is composed of that very sort of, brilliantly abstracted geometry that both maintains a flatness, but at the same time, that element of the drapery is there. So it's a flatness, but it also maintains this kind of volumetric kind of feel. And she's at the top of that mountain.
She is.
Right? She kind of comes forth from that mountain, which I love. So there was something else I wanted to say about this. She does. Okay, so I do have 2 videos queued up tonight. I know you had said there was one we wanted. In the second video, which is that CBS Sunday Morning video,
I like that one too.
They do interview her about her interaction with the Obamas, which I think really kind of shed some light on this, in a good way.
Let's watch some videos.
Why don't we look at the first one that's her in the studio?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right,
so you kind of get to see her process a little bit.
Let's go over to that and let's introduce you a little bit to Amy Sherald. Just give me a second. We'll fire this up.
I'm an American painter painting Americans. They're everyday people doing everyday things. The tradition of portraiture has become a way to reclaim time for me as a Black figurative painter that paints Black people. The work really deals with interiority and steps away from the idea of a public Black self. Public Blackness has been culturally codified as something that's always attached to resistance, which essentially to me limits our humanity and the ways in which that we can imagine ourselves existing. I oftentimes say that the paintings are a resting place for people to see a reflection of themselves that is not in resistance or contention. It's just a Black person just being a person.
A big part of her practice is that she'll pick people off the street, mainly in Baltimore, and she'll take photos of them, or she'll invite them back to her studio and take photos of them. And so they literally are everyday people sort of doing everyday things. And I think that's felt through the work.
It's very intuitive, and I can be driving down the street and I can see someone within an instant, I know, and try to connect with this person to let me use their image.
It's almost like she's scouting the perfect subject. She's looking for something that connects to her almost on a spiritual level. It's not necessarily about any one physical quality.
Once I start the painting, it really becomes less about them and more about my work and what I see and what's happening in my imagination and the archetype that I'm trying to create. These people have let go of that idea of being watched, and they're there to meet your gaze in a different way. And it's a critique on historical Black representation, whether it be in photography or painting.
You can't look at, Amy Sherald painting and not see some of the formative photographers from James Van Der Zee. You also kind of imagine what Frederick Douglass was, talking about when he's talking about, the possibilities for photographs to give African Americans back their dignity at the time.
Black Americans were using photography as a means to assert who they are in the world, thinking about photography as a democratic medium that allows one to disengage in a socio-political power dynamic that places Black people, Black bodies on the margins. Photography became a way to sort of reclaim that. And I think that that's what is happening in Amy's practice.
Historically, portraiture has really been a marker of time and place, this sort of space for who gets to be historicized. She really distills the figures in her paintings in a way that they're sort of floating in their own realm.
I think there's a great power in representing people who have often been told that they are disempowered, often been told that their lives don't matter, often been told that they are not this or that, on a canvas, and allow them to see real reflections of themselves, right? And I think the effect that has is that it allows other people who are not, represented in the frame, but who might live similar lives as as the people who are represented to say, oh, I matter too, right? To say that, there's something about my likeness, about my life that should be reflected, that should be respected.
At the end of the day, Black bodies are political. Like, we're just political. History is political. That's the battle. There has to be some relief from that, or we can never evolve as a people. The work is, for me, like the beginning of trying to figure out a way to deal with that political body versus the real person.
Yeah. She said it in there. The one curator or assistant curator said it about how they're sort of floating in their own space.
Volume is okay.
Volume's fine.
Okay,
Yeah, you're good.
Okay.
So, I'm interested. I'm really interested in that figure ground dynamic, and how that sort of relates to the content.
Yes.
And the choices she makes and how she puts them in that space, that it's a
Mm-hmm.
non-space.
It is a non-space.
Now later, as we sort of get into some of the later images, we forgot about this one.
Well, this was another pivotal piece that came out last year with Breonna Taylor. She did a portrait of her, and this was a commission, I guess, from Vanity Fair.
Yeah.
So this is another very well-known piece.
Right. And, I feel like this one, obviously this is a tragic story, right? And again, I feel like this one doesn't show up in her portfolio too often, like on her web page.
Yeah.
We know the image, we've seen it, like we know this image. But I feel like this strays outside of her everyday people, but she is everyday people.
She is everyday people.
Right. She much more so than some of the others is everyday people, and exemplifies that story in a more direct way, in a way that's much more in the forefront, that's on the cover of the newspaper, right? Whereas I think some of the other portraits sort of try to get at the everyday people in a much more sort of connected, everyday way. She starts to add ground to
She
these.
starts to add some context to them. I have to dig in here a little bit. That painting right there is called Planes, Rockets, and the Spaces in Between. So,
yeah, it's a really big change, and I've been thinking about these a bit, trying to wrap my head around some of the landscapes that are in them.
yeah, well, it's giving a broader narrative of what's going on. There's a story, and not that the other ones didn't have a story, but there's a whole story going on in this painting, like when you start looking at it.
Right. Right.
A lot of symbolism.
Well, yeah. I mean, if this is a mother-son or a mother-daughter, depending on what we're looking at, the mother looks... Do we know?
Not to suppose genders, but I believe it's two females.
Okay. So as the one, and I'll assume she's older just based on the choice of fashion, etc., and also the glance. She looks back at us, the viewer, as the other younger, assumingly younger person looks towards this very sort of futuristic, hopeful kind of rocket launch.
See, that's how you see it, but I see it differently.
I would love to hear how you...
I believe this is a couple.
Oh.
These are two women together.
Okay.
And I believe that there's a lot of symbolism.
Well, and I think that still applies, right? Yeah. I don't necessarily think whether or not they're mother-daughter or whether or not they're lovers or whether, I think that the glance back at the viewer coupled with the forward glance of this other kind of...
Well, it can mean different things, I guess, the context that you put it in. She certainly doesn't smack us over the head with, this painting is about this. So you can certainly draw a couple of conclusions from it. But yeah, she starts putting it into context. Do you have that one with the gentleman sitting on the steel, or no?
I do.
Okay.
It's in here. Yeah.
Okay.
Pumpkin Audrey says, yes, agree, Terry. Mike Rader says, I like the backgrounds, new to me. Yeah. I agree. I really, although, here he is.
Yep.
I still do really appreciate the ones that are backgroundless because of how they sort of play.
Well, even in her background, she doesn't monopolize it with a background. Everything's like beyond the lower thirds. Like you see the ground in there and a little bit of the mountain range, and like, but the figures still are predominantly in that blue background, which is the sky. So
Sure.
she really minimizes the background.
Right. It still maintains a flatness.
Yep.
It still maintains this
Yeah.
kind of. It harkens back to the non-ground.
Yep.
Right.
She creates tension with her composition for sure, and you can see that here too, because it's a little off center. But again, you see your rule of thirds and stuff like that.
I love this piece.
This painting right here is called "If You Surrender to the Air, You Can Ride It," and again, she's putting a figure in with the steel beam. When I first saw this painting, it reminded me exactly of what inspired it. And it was inspired by Charles C. Ebbett's 1932 photo with the gentleman on the steel beams when they were creating the RKO building at Rockefeller Center.
Yeah.
And this was to represent Black Americans in that process. Like this was her way to put them in the narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's just, something about, well, first of all, there's an aspect to the color relationship in this, I think, that speaks to what it is she's trying to say. And I'm not going to claim to know exactly what it is she's trying to say, but I immediately connect with that kind of color aspect to this, right? Versus that photo.
Now, is this still Grisaille here?
I believe it is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so a couple of comments. Ben says that can pass as a photo. JE11 Mart says, something about this one gets me. Yeah, I am completely with you on that. And Scultori says, reminds me of early modernist photography. Yeah, because, there's this element of abstraction in the ways in which the planes interact with one another and the ways with the edges of the image are treated, right? That don't necessarily ground you or identify with we're still not identifying with a true figure-ground relationship here. There's something that sort of gives a hint towards where we're sitting.
Right.
But it still kind of has this impossibleness. Suspension,
right.
Right? So I love this one for that. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around the color on this one, but it's a very sort of light. I mean, there's a reference to an RGB color scheme in this, right? Those are the primary colors of light, if I want to get into that whole thing, but that might be a stretch, but it's interesting to me, and I want to spend some time with it. Maybe Paul Strand. Can you pull that up for me? We might be able to pop that into might be able to pop that in. Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about there, Scultori, and that's a good reference. So can we pop the other video on while we're actually pulling that up? All right, we got a second video for you to watch. It's actually a little bit longer than this one, but it's really a good one. Let's take a look at that and give you a little bit more on this. Here we go.
Now on display in Washington, the official portraits of Barack and Michelle Obama. The story of the artist who painted the former First Lady is the story Alex Wagner has to tell.
Miss Amy Sherald, portrait artist.
Last week, Amy Sherald went from being a virtual unknown to one of the most talked about artists in the world. On Monday, her painting of Michelle Obama was unveiled at the National Portrait Gallery, alongside Kehinde Wiley's portrait of President Barack Obama. Both Sherald and Wiley were interviewed and chosen for the job by the Obamas themselves.
She came in and she looked at Barack and she said, well, Mr. President, I'm really excited to be here and I know I'm being considered for both portraits. She said, but Mrs. Obama, she physically turned to me and she said, I'm really hoping that you and I can work together.
You maybe had a particular interest in painting her.
Yes. I mean, he was asking questions as well, and she was like, no.
Unlike Kehinde Wiley, President Obama's portraitist, Amy Sherald, age 44, had been largely unknown. This was her big break. You've taken out loans, you have waited tables. Tell us how game-changing this moment is.
I am relieved that I can pay back my school loans. You know, it's something that, becoming an artist is not empirical, so it's not about hard work. I mean, you have to put the work in, but that doesn't mean you're going to make it. I think hustling for that long, it kind of like chips away at your self-esteem. And then the breakthrough comes and you're like, oh yeah, that's who I am. Like, this is who I am. Yeah.
The portrait is similar to Sherald's other works, except her models, exclusively black and never smiling, are usually strangers she meets on the street, not former First Ladies. As the process went on with the First Lady, did you get more comfortable?
I did, yeah. We had 2 sittings, but you're still always a little bit nervous having to look her in her eyes, because I have to study the face before I photograph to try to figure out what I want. And those little intense moments where you just have to have courage to keep looking because you get bashful because, you know, you're looking at the First Lady.
Why do you paint black skin as in grayscale?
It just looked good. Like the gray skin on these bright colors, it just looked good. I think also I was subconsciously struggling with not wanting to be marginalized. And I say that because I feel like the black body is a political statement in itself, right? So on canvas, all of a sudden I'm making this political statement just because I'm painting brown skin. But I paint the way that I paint, you know. She chose me, she knew what to expect.
There are some people who look at the portrait of the First Lady and they say, I don't see her in it. I don't see the Michelle Obama that I know.
Yeah. Everybody is invested in them in all kinds of ways, on all different levels. And so for me to even want to paint her makes me crazy, because and I'm setting myself up for criticism, right? I feel like I captured her. When I look at it, I see her. I see the Michelle that was present at the sitting, you know, a contemplative, graceful woman, you know, who understands her place in history.
Today, Amy Sherald has a place in history. Her paintings, which she works on in this Baltimore studio, are now selling for up to $50,000 each. But while this is her moment, it's a moment she wasn't sure she'd live to see. When did you first find out about your heart?
When I was 30. I mean, I've been walking around with my heart function at 18%, which is what most people get transplanted at, but I was asymptomatic, no symptoms at all.
Her heart was failing. Plus, there were relatives back home who needed her help. So she put aside her brushes and returned to Georgia. At one point, Sherald stopped painting for 4 years. In 2012, her brother died of cancer. Just days later, Sherald received a heart transplant from a young donor nearly a decade after her diagnosis.
My brother dying changed me. I didn't realize how strong I was until I lost my brother. And then I realized what my strength, I can get through stuff. And losing him only made me want to live my life even harder.
For an artist all too familiar with mortality, Amy Sherald seems to have found a sense of permanence. After all, her work now hangs in the National Portrait Gallery.
And I think it matters that these portraits are so different, because something happened in history that wasn't supposed to happen. You know, there's a continuum and then there's a stop, and all of a sudden you're like, what was this? So 300 years from now, when the story's been watered down, you know what I mean? It's like those portraits will speak to that moment with the intensity that is necessary to bring forth the truth of what happened and why they were here.
Okay. So, yeah, I love that. And, you know, even though she sort of, I won't say she downplays the Michelle Obama portrait, but it's not front and center in her, how she represents herself, which, you know, which I respect. I love that story of how it kind of came about. So Scultore, just to get back to what you were saying a few minutes ago, you were talking about Paul Strand, as we were talking about maybe early modernist photography that you had suggested, which I think is interesting. And I found an image that doesn't in any way relate to, it does relate to, but let me just pull that image up first. And we were talking about this and this sort of connection to the edge, this kind of abstraction. And then I found this, which I think might be, hang on, let me pull that up bigger. You know, that's a Paul Strand photograph. And I like the way the geometry and that kind of shadow play on the edge of the piece in some way, shape, or form relates to this kind of similar situation. Obviously not in a very direct way, but I think in an indirect way, there's a connection there. So for what it's worth, I mean, that's kind of that's kind of what I was thinking you were talking about. But correct me, absolutely. All right, let's just keep rolling along here. We've got a few more images to show.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of a new take on the bathers on some level, right?
It is, yes. I have to get back to my page over here.
Did you lose your page?
I did. Let's go back over here to Amy. Yeah, so this is a take. This is when she starts incorporating more people together, and then the background and relationships within the paintings that we didn't see with her solo portraits of people.
Gotcha. Steve Winchell is following now. Thanks, Steve. It's good to see you. Thanks for
you.
coming. It's really nice to have you. So go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
No, that's it. I'm trying to find the title here, but I can't find it. I have to scroll through a number of her paintings in order to find the correct title.
Yeah, and this was a little bit later on, so you've probably got some scrolling to do.
Quite a lot.
But now we've got references in this. We've got clouds. We've got sort of that distant kind of water where it darkens on the horizon, right? There's shadow play on the ground. So I think in some of these later ones, things are changing now, right? In the read, at least for me, and I find that to be quite interesting. Steve Winchell, been waiting all semester for a class to finish early enough to jump in. Oh, good. Well, I am very glad you're here. It's an honor. Did you find that one?
I did not.
No.
I can keep searching.
Okay,
now.
you keep searching. I can pop ahead a few, and we can kind of look at a couple of more. Oh, actually, this one.
This one's in Philadelphia. This is part of the Mural Arts program. So you can see it overlooking Philly. I unfortunately did not see it when I was living there, but I don't think it was painted yet. So
I love the largeness of this.
Yes.
I love how now all of a sudden that one-to-one sort of relationship that you might have approaching a painting that's painted in a similar size to you has grown to this more monumental place, right? I would imagine that color choice for the ground in this mural also relates to the sky on, at a certain time of day. And all of a sudden now that woman that's painted here.
6 stories high.
6 stories high.
Yeah.
That woman's place, that place we talk about being negated or possibly just being awkward or strange or non-space or her own space now becomes that city.
Wow.
Right?
Yeah, now this was completed June 20th, 2019. It's in Center City
Oh,
on
this is
Sansom
recent.
Street.
Is it still there?
It is still there. It's at 1108 Sansom Street, which is right around the hospital I used to work at, Jefferson Hospital.
Yeah.
So I would have seen this all the time. But yeah, this is still there. This is a new mural. Usually when murals come up, they're there for indefinitely. I know there's a Keith Haring somewhere on the west side.
As they should
like
be.
Yeah.
I mean, as they should be. Especially a work like this. So,
yeah.
Well, we're gonna pop back here. I think
I still can't find it. But
can't find that image. All right. Well, you
later.
keep working on that. I am going to. Let's see what we got here. I think we're winding down. We're running late tonight.
Too.
We're at
Yeah,
9:13.
Well, we can.
Is it time to roll the credits?
Is
it time to roll the credits?
We can roll the credits.
I got to tell you guys that, first of all, look at this. Isn't this cool? We've got credits.
You guys are like all in our show now.
Look at this. You guys are all here.
Have cred.
We've got new followers, Steve Winchell, Jeff Mart,
right.
Boo Jazz.
Yeah.
We've got Christina subscribing, so thank you for that. That is awesome. I have a tiny, tiny little beer left.
You do have a tiny
with
little
which
bit.
to toast all of our viewers tonight. So
Amy
Sherald. She's awesome.
She's fantastic.
I love her work, and I love her as the sort of segue in portraiture from last week's Van Gogh and Goya into this.
Yes.
I just I really enjoyed this. I'm so glad we did her.
Yeah.
So anyway, from us to you guys, Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for following. Thank you for supporting us, as always. And we will see you next week on Tuesday for episode 32. Now, real quickly, mark your calendars because we've got a couple of dates coming up that we just want to make sure that you note. Number one, April 27th, we will be doing a special edition with the Brownstone Art in Brooklyn for a show that they have coming up. Check our newsletter for that. That's Michelle Mackey. That's going to be a really great show. We're looking forward to that. And then, of course, on April 30th, right after that, we will be hosting the 100 in Art Tour. So that's going to be another great event.
That one's on a Friday night.
That's on a Friday night, so that's a little out of schedule. So make sure you put it on your calendar now so you can make it. And who do we got talking here? Because I can't read that chat.
We have Amanda Tulin.
Thank you. It was great.
John Park. Did we get the John Park, the flowers in the Brock portrait as a direction appeals to me, as opposed to adding elements that might be in the same naturally.
Oh yeah, no, that's true. As a matter of fact, Kahunda, we're gonna do him.
Yeah,
we're definitely we're gonna do him actually at some point. So that's to follow. So stay tuned for that. Yeah. I just love the pared down color stories. Angus Ron, your show passes by too fast. Love them. Thank you. Thank you. It was great from Mom. Great show and way to have real dialogues. Thanks, Sculptori. That means a lot. I appreciate that. Awesome show. Loved it. Thank you. 3 credits.
Aw.
Ben says, great show. Thanks, Ben. And we will see all of you next week.
Next Tuesday.
All right, everybody. Have a good night. Take care. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you soon.
Yep.
Cheers.